So in this video, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution. And in this entire unit, really what we want to focus on and think about is how does the Industrial Revolution change the way people live? So it's going to have an impact on the things that are produced in the nation. It's going to have an impact on how that is produced. In other words, it's going to impact the way people work, where they work. It's going to impact the cost of goods, and it's going to impact the cost of living as well. And so we're going to see, does it increase people's cost of living? Does it decrease the cost of living? In other words, do people are people able to afford more things, or do things become more expensive? Or is their work going to become better, or is their work more difficult, or more boring? Is the work more satisfying? These are the kinds of things. How does it impact the lives of your average person? That's one of the big things that we want to look at. And so it's going to have economic impact, but it's also going to have a social impact on people. So one of the things to understand and recognize here is that the War of 1812 actually in some ways helps to kind of bring about some of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. So the Industrial Revolution really starts in Great Britain, but the United States has an Industrial Revolution as well. It's just a little bit later. So one of the reasons that it does get started really is the War of 1812. When the United States is no longer able to trade with Great Britain, the leading manufacturer in the world at this time, then we've got to start manufacturing and making things on our own. And that leads to a growth of industrialization. It's not as sometimes it's overstated the amount it changes things, because once the war is over, we go back to trading with Great Britain, but it does kind of give a boost to manufacturing during that time, because we're not going to trade with the same country that we're fighting with. So before we can really look at some of these other things, we have to think about, and what is the Industrial Revolution? What does that mean? So revolution is a time of great change. In this case, it's not a change that happens just like that. It's not like before it doesn't happen in just a few days. It happens over the course of many years and even decades. So the Industrial Revolution spans a much longer period than many other like revolutions that are like a war. This is not a war. But what it is it's a change from cottage industry to the factory system. So you can see even in the pictures here, we've got something that's handmade, and now we've got something that's machine made. It's made from in the home, and now it's made in the factory. And so it's a transition from cottage industry or homemade items to factory made items. And so in some cases the factory made items are better quality. In some cases, homemade items are better quality. And then we have a change in the way where people are working. Before you're working in the home, now you're working in the factory. Which of those is better? Well, for your quality of life, often working in the factory is not a great place to work. And so the other thing we're noticing here, we go from skilled labor to unskilled labor. The factory work, you do not have to have the skill. You have to be able to, keep the machine running, versus knowing how to sew and all the ways that, all the details that have to be done in creating something. And so the Industrial Revolution sees a growth in unskilled labor, but that's also going to lead to making items cheaper. And so the cost of goods goes down, because the cost of labor goes down, because the skill necessary is going down. And really, the Industrial Revolution primarily begins in the New England area, New England, Middle States area, this area that's kind of circled here. There's a lot of rivers in this region, and water power is going to be one of the main ways that factories are powered in the early days. And you can see they've got this water wheel where you've got water pouring down from this little man-made canal, this aqueduct of sorts that pours down over this water wheel and powers the mill inside. And so this is the power that is being produced to run a factory during the early part of the Industrial Revolution. So what do you have to have? You have to be near a river that's got a big enough, a strong enough flow to power and move a water wheel. And often you also need a certain drop in elevation, a big enough drop in elevation to produce enough power as well. One of the most important machines of the Industrial Revolution is the cotton gin. The cotton gin was invented by Eli Whitney, and it quickly takes seeds out of cotton fibers. This resulted in more cotton plantations and provided cotton for the textile mills in the North. This cotton gin, whereas before a pound of cotton it would take one person a day or to probably clean just 1 or 2 pounds of cotton. Now with a cotton gin, you can clean, and as the cotton gin gets more and more refined, you can clean maybe 100 pounds of cotton in a day. And so you're able to clean much more cotton much more efficiently and quickly. And that was the kind of the holdup in cotton production. You could grow a lot of cotton, you could pick a lot of cotton, but then the cleaning was very slow, and the cotton gin makes the cleaning slow and therefore made the cost of cotton very high. The cotton gin makes the cost of cleaning cotton low because it can clean so much so efficiently. And so now all of a sudden cleaned cotton is cheaper and can be sent to the cotton mills in the North to produce cotton, cloth of all types. This cloth is also called textiles. So you'll hear of textiles. That's why it's called a textile mill. Another big change that happens during this time, and Eli Whitney is sometimes called the inventor of interchangeable parts. He's not the inventor. He's really the one that is in the United States trying to get people involved in making things with interchangeable parts. He's trying to convince Congress to purchase weapons, guns from him, so using interchangeable parts. And the idea is that the parts are now made so precisely, they can be made precisely by machines, exactly the same, so they will fit. So one part on each gun will fit on each other, and they're interchangeable. In other words, you can take the hammer off of this gun and put the hammer on this other gun, and they will work. It will work in both cases. Eli Whitney actually wasn't really able to do that as well as he thought he could, but he is able to convince Congress to give him basically an opportunity, a contract where he can produce weapons for the United States. What interchangeable parts does, is make mass production possible. You can produce all the parts as long as you can do it very precisely. You can produce all the parts that you need, and then you can put the guns together and rapidly, and so therefore you can produce a lot more, and therefore it's a lot cheaper. But one of the things you have to have for this to happen, these factories are not cheap to build. Factories cost a lot to build. You've got to be able to pay for the labor. Now, the labor is not that expensive. That's not the most expensive part, but it is part of the cost. And so you've got to have a system where you can get the money to produce these factories. And so what you have are investors. These are called capitalists. And in a capitalist society, you can use your capital to make even more money. And so somebody doesn't know a lot about factories, but they've got somebody else that knows about them, and they decide, okay, we're going to pool our money together, and you're going to build this factory and make this factory, and that's how we're going to make money. Well, this is possible in what we call a free enterprise system. And this is one of the big kind of difficulties during the Industrial Revolution. Free enterprise means there's not a lot of regulations. If you have an idea, you can then use that idea, you get some money, and decide we're going to make this thing. Well, I'm going to start this business. Well, in a free enterprise system, there's not a lot of regulations stopping you from doing that. And during the Industrial Revolution, that was certainly the case. Well, what is the drawback? Well, without a lot of regulations, you end up with people working in factories that maybe are very dangerous. You end up in factories that are not very clean. And so it's not only dangerous because of the equipment, it can be dangerous because of the conditions. Maybe it's very smoky because while at first factories were built using water power and powered by, a river, later there's going to be steam engines that are running these factories. And so There's going to be producing a lot of smoke and a lot of pollution, and so we don't have rules about that. And so we see with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, we see the rise of pollution as well. And so free enterprise makes it possible to start a business and create and be innovative and change and bring about a lot of change, but at the same time, without a lot of regulation, a lot of rules. That's what regulations really are. Without these rules, you end up with businesses that produce using resources that may be harmful to the environment, or maybe harmful to the people that are working there, or maybe there's not the products they're producing aren't as good as they claim, and so people end up purchasing something that is not as good a quality as they expect, or something like that. And so regulations, one of the big questions that we have is, how do we balance the rules for businesses with this idea of innovation and creativity? And that's one of the big questions that we have often with this kind of system is, well, if we put a lot of rules, we make it more difficult, it becomes more expensive, people are less likely to be creative and innovative. If we don't have any rules, well, then workers end up hurt and injured, or what's being produced is dangerous to the environment. And so there's all sorts of drawbacks, and we try to balance those. And that's one of the problems and one of the issues that government has to solve. How do we balance these two things? There's competing interests here, and we benefit from them, but we also have negative impacts from them. And that's the job of government, is to balance those competing interests. And so that really finishes up this video. The next video, we'll talk about transportation, and then we'll also talk about urbanization and immigration as well.